The universe operates on principles we understand: physics, chemistry, the fundamental laws of cause and effect. Warp fields bend spacetime according to precise mathematical equations. Transporters convert matter to energy and back again through predictable patterns. Even the most exotic phenomena, subspace anomalies, temporal distortions, quantum singularities, follow rules that can be measured, analyzed, and ultimately comprehended. But what happens when something enters this rational cosmos that doesn't belong? Not an alien species or a spatial phenomenon, but a mind so brilliant and so dangerous that it threatens the very foundation upon which the Federation was built. The USS Enterprise D was conducting a routine patrol along the Romulan neutral zone when Lieutenant Worf's tactical station erupted with alerts. "Captain, sensors are detecting a massive subspace distortion bearing 173 Mark IV. Energy signatures are inconsistent with any known technology." Captain Jean-Luc Picard rose from his command chair, tugging down his uniform tunic in that characteristic gesture. On screen, the view screen shimmered, revealing a wound in space itself, a jagged tear that pulsed with sickly green and violet energy. Tendrils of exotic radiation snaked outward like grasping fingers, and through the rift, fragments of metal tumbled into normal space, their surfaces scorched and twisted. "Fascinating," Data said from Ops, his golden eyes reflecting the sensor readings scrolling across his console. "The rift appears to be collapsing, but residual tachyon emissions suggest it connected two distinct dimensional frameworks. The debris is composed of alloys unknown to Federation databases, tritanium variants with molecular structures that should not be stable in our universe." "Life signs?" Picard asked. "Negative, Captain. However, I am detecting a faint energy signature approximately 40,000 kilometers from the rift. It matches no known." Data paused, which for an android meant something genuinely anomalous had occurred. "Captain, a Romulan warbird is decloaking. They are moving to intercept the signature." Worf's hands moved across tactical. "They are charging weapons and extending tractor beams." Picard's jaw tightened. The Romulans had been monitoring the same phenomenon, which meant whatever came through that rift was already a prize to be claimed. "Hail them, Mr. Worf." "They are not responding." Then yellow alert. "Mr. Data, what exactly are they retrieving?" Data's fingers danced across his console with inhuman precision. "Sensors indicate a humanoid life form inside what appears to be a severely damaged protective suit. The individual is human, Captain, or at least physiologically identical to humans. Life signs are weak but stable." "Human." Picard exchanged a glance with his first officer, Commander William Riker. "How is that possible?" Before anyone could answer, Worf growled a warning. "The warbird has retrieved the subject and is cloaking. They are withdrawing into Romulan space." Picard stood motionless for a moment, his mind racing through the implications. A human, somehow transported through a dimensional rift into one of the most contested regions of space, now in Romulan hands. The Prime Directive didn't apply to humans, and if this individual possessed knowledge of advanced technology, the strategic balance of the entire sector could shift. "Counselor Troy," Picard said, turning to the empath seated beside him. "Did you sense anything from the life form before the Romulans took them?" Deanna Troy's dark eyes were troubled. "For just a moment, yes. It was intense. Not fear, not confusion. Calculation. Whoever that is, Captain, they were already thinking several moves ahead before they even regained consciousness." Picard nodded slowly. "Mr. Crusher, set course to shadow the warbird's trajectory. Stay on our side of the neutral zone, but I want to know where they're going. Mr. LaForge, I need a full analysis of that debris field. If we're going to understand what happened here, we need to know what kind of technology created that rift." "Aye, Captain," came the responses. As the Enterprise adjusted course, Picard returned to his ready room, his mind heavy with questions. Somewhere on that Romulan warbird, a human from another dimension was waking up in the hands of one of the Federation's most dangerous adversaries. And if Counselor Troy's impression was accurate, that human was already planning, already strategizing. The subspace rift had closed, but Picard had the distinct impression that whatever had just entered their universe had opened something far more dangerous than a dimensional tear. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Trek universe, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. Live long and prosper. Aboard the IRW Valdor, Commander Karras stood over the unconscious human, his sharp Romulan features betraying nothing but cold assessment. The subject lay on a medical table in the ship's secure laboratory, still encased in the remains of what their engineers had identified as some kind of powered armor, technology that predated Federation standards by its crude reliance on chemical batteries and mechanical servos, yet surpassed them in pure innovative design. Status, Karras demanded. The Romulan medic checked her readings. Stable. Minor radiation exposure from the dimensional crossing, but nothing our treatments cannot handle. His physiology is completely human, no cybernetic enhancements, no genetic modifications. But Commander, she hesitated. His neural activity is extraordinary. Even unconscious, his brain is processing information at levels I have never seen outside of Vulcan telepaths. Karras leaned closer, studying the human's face. He was not young, perhaps 40 of their years, with a sharp jawline and features that suggested both intelligence and arrogance. Even in unconsciousness, there was something unsettling about him, as if he were merely waiting for the optimal moment to open his eyes. When he wakes, Karras said, I want full security protocols. This human may be more dangerous than he appears. The medic nodded, but before she could respond, the human's eyes snapped open. They were green, cold, and utterly calculating. He assessed his surroundings in less than 2 seconds, the medical equipment, the Romulan guards with disruptors drawn, the commander standing over him, and then he smiled. Romulans, he said, his voice hoarse but steady. Paranoid, strategic, and utterly predictable. You brought me aboard because you believe I represent technological advantage. You're correct, of course. But you should be far more concerned about what I'm going to do with that assumption. Karras felt a chill run down his spine. This human had just woken in enemy captivity, surrounded by armed guards, and he was smiling. Who are you? Karras demanded. The human sat up slowly, the damaged armor whining in protest. He looked down at his ruined technology with obvious irritation, then met Karras's eyes with a gaze that held no fear whatsoever. My name, he said, is Lex Luthor. And you and I are going to have a very interesting conversation about what I can offer the Romulan Star Empire, and what it's going to cost you. Karras had interrogated enemies before, Federation officers who clung to their principles even under neural scanners, Klingon warriors who spat defiance until their last breath, even a Cardassian spy who had nearly talked his way to freedom. But this human was different. Luthor sat in the detention cell aboard the Valdor with the posture of a man attending a business meeting, not a prisoner facing an uncertain fate. Your armor is primitive, Karras said, circling the containment field. Mechanical actuators instead of force field enhancement. Chemical propulsion weapons. Your technology suggests a civilization that has barely achieved faster-than-light capability, yet the dimensional rift that brought you here required energy output that surpasses anything in the Romulan fleet. Luthor examined his hands, flexing fingers that had been encased in gauntlets for the past 18 hours. The Romulans had removed the damaged armor piece by piece, scanning every component with sensors that he found woefully inadequate for the task. You're not wrong, he said. Where I come from, we haven't achieved what you would call warp travel. We're still bound to our solar system, still fighting over resources that should be trivial to replicate. But then again, we also have gods walking among us, which tends to complicate technological development. Karras stopped circling. Gods. Figures of speech don't translate well, apparently. Luthor leaned forward, his green eyes sharp. Let me be more precise. My world has individuals with abilities that defy your physics. Flight without propulsion. Invulnerability without force fields. Strength that could tear apart your warship's hull plating with bare hands. And I have spent my entire adult life finding ways to level the playing field against them. The Romulan commander felt that chill again, the same instinct that had kept him alive through 3 campaigns against the Federation and 2 against the Klingon. This human was not boasting. He was establishing parameters, laying groundwork for something. The weapon I was testing when the rift opened was designed to kill one of these gods, Luthor continued. It failed, obviously, or I wouldn't be here. But the energy matrix required to penetrate Kryptonian cellular structure apparently had an unexpected interaction with dimensional barriers. I suspect the exotic radiation from your local stellar phenomenon, what do you call it, subspace, created a resonance cascade that tore through the membrane separating our realities. Kara's accessed his data pad, pulling up the sensor logs from the rift. The energy signatures matched nothing in Romulan databases, but if this human could reproduce that effect intentionally. You're claiming you can weaponize dimensional rifts. I'm claiming I understand the theoretical framework that created one accidentally, Luthor corrected. With access to your technology, your dilithium matrix energy converters, your subspace field generators, I could potentially reproduce the effect. Or I could help you understand why your cloaking devices hemorrhage tachyon particles that any competent sensor array can detect. Or I could redesign your plasma torpedo guidance systems to actually hit fast-moving targets. Or, he smiled that unsettling smile again. I could tell the Federation everything about Romulan military protocols, ship configurations, and strategic weaknesses that I've observed in the past 6 hours. The threat hung in the air like disruptor fire. Kara stepped closer to the containment field. You would betray us so quickly. We saved your life. You retrieved a potentially valuable asset, Luthor said. Let's not pretend this was altruism. You're Romulan. Everything is calculation. Everything is strategy. You want to know if I'm worth the trouble of keeping, and I'm simply providing you with data points. He stood, moving to the edge of the containment field, close enough that Kara's could see the absolute conviction in his eyes. I don't belong to your Federation, Commander. I don't subscribe to their naive philosophy of infinite diversity or their prime directive that allows entire civilizations to suffer rather than interfere. I understand power. I understand that the strong shape reality while the weak merely survive it. That's why you're going to release me from this cell and give me access to your engineering databases. And why would I do that? Because in approximately 4 hours, the Federation starship that was monitoring the rift will intercept this vessel, Luthor said calmly. You know it, I know it. They're tracking your trajectory right now, waiting for you to make a mistake. When they do, you have 2 choices. Fight them and risk an incident that could reignite hostilities along the neutral zone, or negotiate. If you negotiate, I become leverage. But if you give me access to your systems now, I can give you something far more valuable than a prisoner. Kara's kept his expression neutral, but his mind raced. The human was right, long-range sensors had detected the Enterprise D maintaining parallel course just outside the neutral zone. Captain Picard would not violate the treaty, but he would also not abandon a human to Romulan custody without exhausting every diplomatic option. What could you possibly give me in 4 hours? Luthor's smile widened. A reason for the Federation to fear you again. 2 hours later, Kara stood in the Valdor's engineering section, watching Luthor work with a speed that bordered on disturbing. The human had interfaced with their computer systems using a damaged device from his armor, something he called a personal data assistant, and within minutes had decrypted access protocols that should have taken Romulan intelligence operatives weeks to crack. Your encryption is layered but predictable, Luthor muttered, his fingers dancing across the Romulan interface with growing familiarity. 3-dimensional algorithmic matrices with rotating cipher keys. Elegant, but vulnerable to quantum probability mapping once you understand the baseline architecture. He pulled up schematics for the Warbird's cloaking device, his eyes scanning technical readouts with the intensity of a predator studying prey. Ah! There it is. There is what, the chief engineer demanded, clearly offended that this alien was critiquing Romulan technology. Your phase variance oscillator is operating at a fixed frequency, Luthor said, highlighting a component deep in the cloaking system. It creates a stable cloak, yes, but also generates a predictable harmonic in the tachyon spectrum. That's how Federation sensors detect you. They're not seeing through the cloak, they're detecting the side effect of your stabilization method. He looked up at Kara's. Give me access to your subspace field generators and I can eliminate the tachyon signature entirely. The chief engineer's expression shifted from offense to intrigue. That would make our cloak truly undetectable. At least to Federation sensor technology, Luthor agreed. I can't speak to what other species might detect. But yes, your vessels would become genuine ghosts. He turned back to the console, pulling up power distribution networks. Of course, the modification will require recalibrating, Karas asked quietly. The Federation will offer you sanctuary, resources, everything you need to rebuild your life in this universe. We offer you nothing but suspicion and conditional cooperation. Luthor paused, his hands hovering over the console. He turned to face the Romulan commander fully, and for the first time, Karas saw something genuine behind the calculating exterior, not kindness or warmth, but absolute certainty. The Federation believes that humanity's greatest achievement is abandoning ambition, Luthor said. That we evolved beyond competition, beyond the drive for excellence, beyond the need for exceptional individuals to lead the masses toward greatness. They've created a civilization where no one goes hungry, no one lacks shelter, and no one dreams of being extraordinary because mediocrity is celebrated as equality. His voice carried quiet intensity. I've spent my entire life fighting gods, Commander. Not because I feared them, but because I refused to live in a universe where humanity needed saviors. And I'll be damned if I'm going to embrace a philosophy that says humanity's salvation comes from giving up the very thing that makes us capable of challenging the gods in the first place. Karas understood then. This human wasn't helping the Romulans because he believed in their cause. He was helping them because they represented something the Federation had abandoned, ambition without apology, strength without guilt, the conviction that some beings were simply superior and should act accordingly. The Enterprise will arrive soon, Karas said. What do you want me to tell them? Luthor smiled and returned to his work. Tell them the truth. Tell them you have a human refugee who doesn't want their help. And then let's see how Captain Picard handles a man who looks at his utopia and sees a cage. The Enterprise D dropped out of warp precisely at the edge of the neutral zone, her massive saucer section gleaming against the backdrop of distant stars. On the bridge, Captain Picard stood with his hands clasped behind his back, studying the tactical display where the Romulan warbird's projected course intersected with a debris field from an abandoned mining operation, neutral territory, technically, where neither side could claim jurisdiction. They're heading for the Yadala Nebula, Riker observed, leaning against the railing. If they get inside that plasma cloud, we'll lose them completely. They know that, Picard said. Which means they're either running, or they want us to follow them somewhere specific. He turned to Worf. Hail them again, Lieutenant. Remind them that they are in possession of a human citizen, and that we are willing to discuss terms for peaceful transfer. Worf's expression suggested he'd rather discuss terms through photon torpedoes, but he complied. Moments later, the view screen flickered to life, revealing Commander Karas in the command center of the Valdor. Behind him, Picard could see the distinctive architecture of a Deridex-class warbird, vast, powerful, and designed to intimidate. Captain Picard, Karas said with the formal courtesy that Romulans used when they held superior position. Your persistence is noted. However, the individual you seek is not a prisoner. He is a guest who has requested asylum within the Romulan Star Empire. Picard felt Troy shift beside him. She was sensing something, but her expression remained carefully neutral. Commander, I find it difficult to believe that a human who arrived through an accidental dimensional rift would immediately seek protection from a foreign power rather than his own species. Perhaps you should ask him yourself. The view screen split, and Picard found himself looking at a man who radiated controlled intensity even through subspace transmission. Lex Luthor stood in what appeared to be the Warbird's engineering section, wearing a simple gray tunic that the Romulans must have provided. His green eyes assessed Picard with the same clinical precision that Picard had seen in admirals, strategists, and the occasional sociopath. "Captain Jean-Luc Picard," Luthor said, clearly having done his research in the short time available. "Captain of the Federation flagship, veteran of first contact with the Borg, and a man who believes that humanity's greatest achievement is the Prime Directive. I've read your speeches on Federation philosophy, Captain. Quite inspiring, if you believe that civilization should be defined by what it refuses to do rather than what it dares to attempt." Picard kept his expression neutral, but he felt the subtle barb. "Mr. Luthor, I presume. Your name was encoded in the remains of your armor's memory systems. LexCorp Industrial, a name that suggests you were a person of some influence in your reality." "I was the most influential person," Luthor corrected without arrogance, merely stating fact. "And I find myself in the unique position of starting over in a universe that has apparently solved every problem that made me necessary in the first place. How fascinating that humanity no longer needs visionaries when replicators provide everything and transporters eliminate distance. Tell me, Captain, what drives your species now that you've eliminated scarcity, competition, and the very concept of exceptionalism?" Riker stepped forward, his jaw tight. "We're driven by exploration, discovery, and the pursuit of knowledge. We've evolved beyond ambition," Luthor interrupted smoothly. "Yes, I've heard the speech. The Federation has transcended humanity's base instincts. You no longer fight for resources because you have infinite resources. You no longer compete because competition breeds inequality. You've created paradise by eliminating everything that makes humans exceptional." He leaned forward slightly. "How many geniuses has your Federation produced in the last century, Captain? How many Einsteins, how many Da Vincis? Or have you bred them out of existence by making comfort and contentment the highest virtues?" Data spoke up, his android curiosity overriding tactical concerns. "The Federation has produced numerous scientific and artistic achievements. Dr. Leah Brahms revolutionized warp field theory. Dr. Paul Mannheim pioneered temporal mechanics. The Aldebaran Music Academy has incremental improvements," Luthor said dismissively. "Refinements of existing frameworks. When was the last time one of your scientists fundamentally challenged the paradigm? When did a Federation citizen look at the impossible and make it real through sheer force of will and intellect?" He smiled that unsettling smile. "I've been in this universe for less than a day, Captain, and I've already improved Romulan cloaking technology beyond what your entire Starfleet R&D division has managed in decades. Not because I'm smarter than everyone in your Federation, though I probably am, but because I was raised in a world where excellence was rewarded and mediocrity was not celebrated as diversity." Picard felt the familiar weight of philosophical debate settling over him. He'd engaged in countless such discussions, with Q about humanity's potential, with hostile species about the value of peace, with his own crew about the boundaries of the Prime Directive. But Luthor was different. He wasn't arguing from ignorance or alien perspective. He was arguing from the very foundation of human exceptionalism that the Federation had deliberately moved beyond. "Mr. Luthor," Picard said carefully, "the Federation does not suppress excellence. We encourage it. But we have learned that a civilization built on the worship of exceptional individuals inevitably creates hierarchies of worth, where some lives matter more than others. We have chosen equality." "You've chosen comfortable slavery," Luthor interrupted. "Everyone gets fed, everyone gets housed, everyone gets their holodeck fantasies, and in exchange, you've surrendered the drive that made humanity capable of challenging the universe itself. You've eliminated poverty by eliminating ambition. You've eliminated war by eliminating the conviction that some ideals are worth fighting for." His voice dropped to something colder. "Tell me, Captain, when the Borg came, did your replicators and your equality stop them? Or did it take exceptional individuals, you, your crew, your strategic brilliance, to save your civilization?" The bridge fell silent. Even Riker, usually quick with a response, seemed caught by the question. Troy leaned forward. Captain, I'm sensing something complex from him. He believes what he's saying, but there's also calculation. He's testing us. Luthor's expression shifted slightly, approval, perhaps, at being partially understood. Your Betazoid counselor is perceptive. Yes, Captain, I'm testing you. Because I need to know if the Federation is capable of recognizing when its own philosophy becomes its weakness. You're about to face threats that your replicators can't solve and your diplomacy can't prevent. The Borg are only the beginning. And when those threats come, you're going to need people like me, people who understand that sometimes the needs of the many require one exceptional individual willing to do what the many cannot. Kara's cleared his throat on the split screen. As entertaining as this philosophical debate is, Captain Picard, the fact remains that Mr. Luthor has requested asylum in Romulan space. We have no obligation to surrender him. Picard turned his full attention to Luthor. You would truly choose to live among a people who value deception and strategic advantage over honesty and cooperation? The Romulans will use you, Mr. Luthor. The moment your usefulness expires. I'll be disposed of, Luthor finished. Yes, Captain, I understand how power works. The difference is, I won't let my usefulness expire. I'll make myself indispensable, and in the process, I'll gain resources, knowledge, and leverage. The Romulans understand that excellence has value. Your Federation understands that everyone has equal value, which means excellence has no value at all. Picard felt something he rarely experienced, a genuine temptation to abandon protocol. He could order Worf to lock weapons on the Warbird, could threaten a border incident, could invoke half a dozen Federation regulations that would justify retrieving Luthor by force. But doing so would prove Luthor's point, that sometimes principles had to be violated for practical necessity. Mr. Luthor, Picard said quietly, I cannot force you to accept Federation protection. But I want you to understand something about the universe you've entered. Here, cooperation has built an alliance of over 150 worlds. Here, diversity has created strength that no single exceptional individual could match. And here, the belief that all life has value has allowed us to face threats that would have destroyed civilizations built on the worship of the exceptional. Luthor nodded slowly, something like respect flickering across his features. Well said, Captain. And perhaps you're right. Perhaps I'll discover that my philosophy has no place in this universe. He paused. Or perhaps I'll prove that even your utopia needs someone willing to make the hard choices you've evolved beyond making. The transmission ended abruptly. Kara's face filled the screen again. Captain, we are departing for Romulan space. Any attempt to follow will be considered an act of aggression. Understood, Commander, Picard said, his voice heavy. But know this, we will be monitoring Mr. Luthor's situation. If we have reason to believe he is being coerced or harmed, you'll do nothing, Kara said flatly. Because to do so would violate the same principles you just defended so eloquently. The Romulan Star Empire thanks you for your consistency, Captain. The screen went dark. Picard stood motionless as the Warbird cloaked and vanished from sensors. Around him, his bridge crew waited for orders, for wisdom, for the certainty that their captain always provided. Captain. Riker said softly. Your orders. Picard took a slow breath. We return to our patrol route, number 1. And we file a complete report with Starfleet Command about Lex Luthor, genius, philosopher, and quite possibly the most dangerous human to enter Federation space since Khan Noonien Singh. 3 days later, the Enterprise D received new orders that brought Picard to his ready room with Admiral Elena Nechaev's stern face glowering from his desktop monitor. The Admiral had never been one for pleasantries, and her opening words confirmed that this conversation would be no different. Captain, Starfleet Intelligence has been monitoring subspace chatter along the neutral zone. The Romulans are mobilizing resources to a research facility on Nelvana 3, a world they abandoned 15 years ago after we exposed their supposed supply depot as a staging ground for invasion. Whatever Luthor is building for them, they consider it worth breaking their own strategic patterns. Picard leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly. Admiral, with respect, we cannot violate Romulan sovereignty based on speculation about what one human might. I'm not asking you to violate anything, Captain. Nechayev's tone carried the edge of someone who'd already had this argument with a dozen other officers. I'm ordering you to accept a passenger. Someone who has particular insight into extraordinary individuals and how to handle them when they refuse to acknowledge that their brilliance doesn't give them the right to reshape civilization in their image. The ready room door chimed before Picard could respond. Come, he said, confused by the timing. The door slid open, and Picard felt his carefully maintained diplomatic composure falter. The man who entered wore civilian clothes, dark slacks and a turtleneck, but carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. He was perhaps 60, with gray hair and sharp features that reminded Picard uncomfortably of certain Section 31 operatives he'd encountered. Captain Picard, the man said, extending a hand. Bruce Wayne. The Admiral thought my experience with exceptional individuals might be useful in your current situation. Picard stood slowly, accepting the handshake while his mind raced. The name was familiar. Wayne Industries had contracted with the Federation for dilithium processing improvements 2 years ago, though the company operated primarily in the civilian sector. But something about the man's grip, the way his eyes catalogued every detail of the ready room with trained precision. Mr. Wayne, Picard said carefully. I was unaware that civilian contractors were being consulted on matters of interstellar security. Wayne's smile was brief and knowing. I'm not here as a contractor, Captain. Let's say I have personal experience with individuals who possess extraordinary abilities and believe that their gifts justify operating outside societal norms. He moved to the window, gazing out at the stars with an expression that Picard couldn't quite read. Admiral Nechayev reached out to me after reading your report on Luthor. His philosophy, his conviction that humanity needs exceptional leaders, it's not new. Where I come from, we called them vigilantes. Some of them saved lives. Some of them decided that their judgment was superior to law, to democracy, to the very concept of collective governance. Picard felt pieces clicking into place. You're not from the Federation originally. Earth, but not this Earth, Wayne confirmed. I arrived through a temporal anomaly 5 years ago. Starfleet was remarkably accommodating once they verified my identity and determined I wasn't a threat. He turned to face Picard directly. In my timeline, I knew someone very much like Lex Luthor. Brilliant, charismatic, absolutely convinced that humanity needed his guidance to reach its potential. And I spent decades fighting to prevent him from implementing his vision of perfection. On the monitor, Admiral Nechayev spoke again. Mr. Wayne has been instrumental in helping us understand individuals from alternate timelines and realities. His insights have proven valuable in 3 separate incidents involving temporal refugees. Captain, your orders are to proceed to Station Salem 1, where Mr. Wayne will brief you and your senior staff on Lex Luthor's probable strategies and psychological profile. Picard nodded slowly, though every diplomatic instinct warned him that this was becoming far more complicated than a simple asylum case. Understood, Admiral. Enterprise out. The screen went dark, leaving Picard alone with the mysterious civilian who claimed to understand the man currently assisting the Romulan military. Captain, Wayne said, settling into the chair across from Picard's desk without waiting for invitation, before we begin, I need to know, what did Luthor say to you during your conversation? What arguments did he make? Picard considered the question carefully. He challenged the fundamental premise of Federation society. He argued that by eliminating competition and celebrating equality, we've suppressed the drive for excellence. That our comfort has made us complacent, and that when genuine threats emerge, we lack the exceptional individuals necessary to counter them. And what did you feel when he said it? The question caught Picard off guard. I felt that he was deliberately provocative, testing our philosophical foundations. But did any part of you wonder if he was right? Picard met Wayne's gaze and saw something unexpected, not judgment, but genuine curiosity mixed with hard-earned understanding. Yes, Picard admitted quietly. For a moment, I wondered if our pursuit of equality had inadvertently discouraged the kind of driven brilliance that defines generations. If our contentment had become complacency. Wayne nodded as if this confirmed something. That's Luthor's gift, Captain. He makes you question your most fundamental beliefs, not through deception, but through uncomfortable truths wrapped in dangerous conclusions. Yes, the Federation may have traded some edge for stability. Yes, your society might produce fewer world-changing geniuses than humanity's more competitive eras. But Luthor takes that legitimate observation and uses it to justify something far more dangerous, the belief that exceptional individuals have the right, even the obligation, to impose their vision on the masses who cannot match their brilliance. You speak as if you know him personally. I know his type, Wayne corrected. In my timeline, I watched brilliant people convince themselves that their intelligence justified autocracy. That their strategic vision was more valuable than democratic consensus. Some of them built empires. Some of them saved the world. And all of them, every single one, eventually reached a point where they decided that humanity was too flawed to be trusted with its own future. He leaned forward. Luthor is in Romulan space right now, improving their technology and ingratiating himself with their command structure. He'll make himself indispensable, exactly as he told you he would. But that's not his end goal. What is his end goal? To prove that the Federation is wrong, Wayne said simply. To demonstrate that your philosophy of equality and cooperation is inadequate for the threats you face. He'll wait for a crisis, something the Federation can't solve through diplomacy or standard procedure, and then he'll position himself as the exceptional individual who can save you. And in that moment, Captain, you'll have to choose between maintaining your principles and accepting help from someone who represents everything your civilization has evolved beyond. Picard felt a chill run down his spine. You believe he would allow people to die simply to prove a philosophical point? I believe he would allow people to die for what he genuinely sees as the greater good, Wayne corrected. Luthor isn't evil in the traditional sense. He doesn't want to harm people. He wants to save them, from themselves, from their own limitations, from their inability to see what he sees. And that makes him far more dangerous than any simple villain. Wayne stood, moving back to the window. In my timeline, I spent years trying to find common ground with someone like him. Trying to show him that humanity's strength comes from its collective potential, not from exceptional individuals imposing their will. I failed. He chose his path, and I chose mine, and we became enemies because neither of us could accept the other's vision of what humanity should be. And now you're here to help ensure I don't make the same mistakes. Wayne smiled, but there was sadness in it. I'm here because the Admiral thought you might need someone who understands what you're up against. Luthor is going to test everything you believe, Captain. He's going to create situations where your principles seem inadequate, where the Prime Directive feels like cowardice, where equality looks like weakness. And he'll do it all while genuinely believing he's helping humanity achieve its true potential. Picard stood as well, moving to stand beside Wayne at the window. Outside, the stars streamed past at warp velocity, infinite and indifferent to human philosophy. Mr. Wayne, I've faced Q, an omnipotent being who tested humanity's worthiness to exist. I've negotiated with the Borg, who believe individuality itself is a weakness to be eliminated. I've defended the Prime Directive even when it meant watching civilizations suffer. What makes you believe that Lex Luthor poses a threat I cannot handle? Because Q tested you from outside humanity, Wayne said quietly. The Borg reject everything human. But Luthor? He's going to test you from inside humanity's heart. He's going to use your own doubts, your own questions about whether the Federation's path is truly right. And unlike Q or the Borg, he's going to make you wonder if maybe, just maybe, he has a point. The ready room fell silent except for the gentle thrum of the warp engines. Picard thought about the conversation with Luthor, about the uncomfortable questions that still lingered in his mind. About the times when the Prime Directive had felt more like an excuse than a principle. About the moments when he'd wished for someone with the vision and courage to simply act, consequences be damned. When do we reach Station Salem 1? Picard asked finally. 18 hours, Wayne replied. Which gives us time to discuss what you're really dealing with. Not just a genius in Romulan space, but a man who genuinely believes that the next stage of human evolution requires abandoning the very equality that defines your civilization. A man who will prove his point, Captain, even if it means tearing the Federation apart to do it. Picard turned away from the window, his decision made. Then we'll need to brief the senior staff immediately. The observation lounge of the Enterprise D held an unusual tension as Picard's senior staff assembled around the curved table. Bruce Wayne stood at the head of the room, a series of data isolinear chips arranged before him with the precision of someone who'd learned that details mattered in the difference between life and death. Before we begin, Wayne said, his voice carrying the weight of experience, I need everyone here to understand something fundamental. Lex Luthor is not insane. He's not evil. He's not driven by greed or power lust in any conventional sense. He is a true believer in a philosophy that makes perfect logical sense, if you accept his fundamental premise. And what premise is that? Dr. Crusher asked, her medical curiosity evident. That humanity's potential is being artificially limited by systems designed to protect the mediocre from the exceptional. Wayne activated the wall display, showing what appeared to be technical schematics. In the 3 days since entering Romulan space, Luthor has already provided them with 17 distinct technological improvements. Cloaking efficiency increased by 38%. Plasma torpedo yield up by 22%. Structural integrity field modifications that make their warbuds nearly 40% more resilient to phaser fire. Worf's expression darkened. He is arming our enemies. He's proving his value, Wayne corrected. And more importantly, he's demonstrating that one exceptional individual can accomplish in 3 days what entire research teams couldn't achieve in decades. He's making the Romulans dependent on him while simultaneously making his point about exceptionalism. Wayne pulled up another file. But here's what you need to understand about how he thinks. These improvements, they're not his real contribution. Data tilted his head, processing. If technological advancement is not his primary objective, what is? Cultural infiltration, Wayne said grimly. Luthor studied the Romulan power structure during his initial captivity. He understood immediately that the Tal Shir, their intelligence agency, operates with significant autonomy from the Senate. That their military has factions competing for influence. That their entire society is built on the principle that strategic advantage justifies any action. He met each officer's eyes in turn. He's not just giving them technology. He's giving them a philosophy that validates their existing worldview while making them see him as essential to their future dominance. Geordi LaForge leaned forward, his visor tracking the data streams. You're saying he's manipulating an entire civilization. I'm saying he's doing what he does best, identifying the existing power structures and making himself the fulcrum on which they balance. Wayne brought up communication intercepts that Starfleet intelligence had acquired through channels Picard suspected he didn't want to know about. 2 days ago, Luthor met with Colonel Lovick of the Tal Shir. The meeting lasted 4 hours. Within 6 hours of that meeting, 3 Romulan research facilities received new directives to pursue projects that Luthor proposed. Within 12 hours, the Romulan Senate Science Directorate requisitioned resources equivalent to what they'd normally allocate over 6 months. Riker whistled low. He's got them convinced he's the key to military superiority over the Federation. Worse, Wayne said. He's got them convinced that his philosophy, that exceptional individuals should lead rather than serve, is compatible with their existing power structure. The Romulans already believe in hierarchy, in the strong dominating the weak. Luthor is simply giving them a human who validates that worldview while making them technologically dependent on his brilliance. Counselor Troy spoke up, her empathic senses clearly troubled. But surely the Romulans understand that he's using them? That his loyalty is to his own agenda? Of course they do, Wayne said. And they don't care, because right now, his agenda aligns with theirs. He wants to prove that exceptionalism trumps equality. They want technological advantage over the Federation. It's a marriage of convenience, until it isn't. He pulled up another file, this one showing energy signatures. But here's where it gets complicated. 3 hours ago, we detected unusual subspace emissions from the Nelvana 3 research facility. Emissions that matched the signature of the dimensional rift that brought Luthor here. The room fell silent. Picard leaned forward. He's trying to replicate the rift. He's trying to understand it, Wayne corrected. And if he succeeds, he'll have access to something far more valuable than improved cloaking devices. He'll have the ability to potentially traverse dimensions, to access resources and knowledge from alternate realities, to position himself as the only person in this entire universe who understands multidimensional physics. Wayne's expression hardened. In my timeline, I watched someone like Luthor gain access to technology that let him peer into alternate realities. Do you know what he saw? Universes where his philosophy had won. Where exceptional individuals ruled benevolently over grateful masses. Where humanity had achieved heights of advancement that seemed impossible in our reality. And it convinced him he was right, Picard said quietly, understanding dawning. It convinced him that he was absolutely, fundamentally correct about everything, Wayne confirmed. Because he could point to empirical evidence from alternate realities and say, look, this works. My way leads to greatness. Your way leads to stagnation. And how do you argue against evidence from infinity? Data's positronic brain processed the implications at quantum speeds. If Luthor succeeds in accessing alternate realities and discovers versions of humanity that achieved greater technological or social advancement through exceptionalism-based governance, he will possess an argument that the Federation cannot refute through logic alone. Exactly, Wayne said. He'll have proof that the Federation's path, equality, cooperation, the suppression of exceptionalism in favor of collective good, is objectively inferior to his preferred model. And he'll use that proof to undermine everything the Federation stands for. Dr. Crusher shook her head. But even if he finds realities where exceptionalism led to technological advancement, that doesn't mean those societies were better. Technology isn't the measure of civilization. Try telling that to the Romulans when Luthor gives them weapons that make Federation shields obsolete, Wayne said. Or to Federation colonies when Romulan raids succeed because their cloaking technology has become truly undetectable. Or to Starfleet Command when they realize that one human's defection has shifted the balance of power in this entire sector. He paused, letting the implications sink in. Luthor doesn't need to convince you that he's right, Doctor. He just needs to convince enough people that the Federation's philosophy can't protect them from the threats he'll help create. Picard stood, moving to the window where stars streaked past at warp speed. He'd spent his entire career defending the principles that defined the Federation. The belief that all sentient beings had inherent worth. That cooperation was superior to competition. That the strong had an obligation to protect the weak, not to rule them. But standing here, listening to Wayne describe Luthor's strategy, he felt the uncomfortable weight of doubt. Mr. Wayne, Picard said without turning, you've told us what Luthor is doing and why. Now tell us how we stop him without proving his point. The silence stretched long enough that Picard finally turned to face Wayne. The man's expression was grim. That's the problem, Captain. Every action you take against him reinforces his narrative. If you do nothing, he proves the Federation is weak. If you act decisively, he proves the Federation is hypocritical, that when truly threatened, you abandon your principles just like he predicted. If you try to counter his technological improvements, he proves that equality can't compete with exceptionalism. If you attempt to extract him from Romulan space by force, he proves that the Federation imposes its will on others when convenient. Wayne moved closer to Picard. In my timeline, I spent 20 years in this impossible position. Every time I acted against someone like Luthor, I validated his claim that society needed exceptional individuals operating outside normal constraints. Every time I didn't act, people suffered. So what did you do? Riker asked. I became what I fought against, Wayne said quietly. I operated in shadows. I built contingencies against allies in case they became threats. I made decisions that no democratic society would approve, all while telling myself I was protecting the very principles I was violating. He looked at each officer in turn. I'm telling you this because you need to understand the trap you're walking into. Luthor isn't just a strategic threat. He's a philosophical bomb designed to detonate the foundation of everything you believe. And the moment you start compromising your principles to stop him, he's already won. Picard felt the weight of command settle heavier on his shoulders. He'd faced impossible choices before, the Borg, Cardassian war crimes, the ethical complexities of the Prime Directive. But those had been external threats. This was something far more insidious, a threat that attacked from within the very heart of human nature itself. Then we don't compromise. Picard said firmly. We don't abandon our principles, and we don't validate his philosophy by acting as if the ends justify the means. We find a third option. What third option? Wayne asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Picard allowed himself a slight smile. The one that Luthor's brilliance hasn't accounted for because it requires something his philosophy fundamentally rejects, the possibility that collective wisdom can exceed individual genius. That cooperation can solve problems that competition cannot. That the Federation's strength comes not from exceptional individuals, but from exceptional principles applied by ordinary people doing extraordinary things together. Wayne studied Picard for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're going to try to prove him wrong. No, Mr. Wayne. I'm going to demonstrate that his premise, that humanity needs exceptional leaders, is a solution to a problem that the Federation has already solved through a different mechanism entirely. Not by suppressing exceptionalism, but by creating a civilization where everyone has the opportunity to be exceptional in their own way, where collective potential exceeds any individual's capacity, no matter how brilliant. That's a nice sentiment, Captain, Wayne said. But how do you prove it when Luthor has the Romulans behind him and access to technology that could reshape this entire sector? Picard returned to his seat at the head of the table, his command presence reasserting itself. By doing what the Federation has always done when faced with impossible odds. We adapt. We cooperate. And we refuse to accept that the only path forward is the one that requires us to abandon who we are. He looked at his senior staff. Opinions? Data spoke first. Captain, if we accept Mr. Wayne's analysis, Luthor represents a mimetic threat as much as a strategic one. His ideas, if successful, could inspire others throughout the Federation to question our foundational principles. However, ideas can only be countered with superior ideas, not force. Agreed, Troy said. And I think we're missing something important. Luthor believes exceptionalism is being suppressed, but he's measuring exceptionalism only by his own standards. Individual brilliance, technological achievement, strategic dominance. But what about the exceptionalism of a species that created a civilization spanning 150 worlds without conquest? The exceptionalism of maintaining peace when war would be easier. The exceptionalism of believing in principles even when they're inconvenient. Worf rumbled his approval. There is honor in strength, but there is greater honor in strength restrained. A warrior who never fights is not weak, he is wise enough to know when battle serves no purpose. Geordi added, and from an engineering perspective, yeah, Luthor might be a genius. But the warp drive wasn't invented by one person. The transporter wasn't perfected by a lone brilliant mind. Every major advancement in Federation technology came from teams of people building on each other's work, sharing knowledge instead of hoarding it. Picard felt something loosening in his chest, the collective wisdom of his crew, each contributing their perspective, building toward a solution that none of them could have reached alone. This was what Luthor couldn't understand, what his philosophy fundamentally rejected. The idea that the whole could genuinely exceed the sum of its parts. Then we proceed on multiple fronts, Picard decided. Data, I want a complete analysis of every technological improvement Luthor has provided to the Romulans. If he's as brilliant as Mr. Wayne suggests, there may be vulnerabilities built into his designs, insurance policies in case the Romulans betray him. Geordi, work with data on understanding the dimensional rift mechanics. If Luthor is pursuing access to alternate realities, we need to understand the implications and risks. Counselor, I want a psychological profile that goes beyond tactics. I need to understand what Luthor truly wants, not just what he's doing. And number 1, he turned to Riker, prepare a diplomatic mission to Romulus. We're going to request a formal audience to discuss the implications of dimensional technology, and we're going to do it through proper channels with full transparency. Captain, Wayne interjected, if you announce what you know, Luthor will adapt. He'll change his approach. Good, Picard said. Because every time he adapts to counter our transparency, he validates our philosophy over his. Every time he operates in shadows while we operate in light, he proves that his exceptionalism requires deception while our equality requires only honesty. Picard stood, his decision made. Mr. Wayne, thank you for your insights. They've been invaluable. But the Federation didn't survive this long by fighting darkness with darkness. We've survived by being the light that makes darkness visible. Wayne smiled, but it was tinged with something between respect and concern. I hope you're right, Captain. Because in my experience, men like Luthor don't lose philosophical arguments. They simply wait until reality forces everyone else to admit they were right all along. Then we'll have to ensure, Picard said quietly, that reality proves him wrong. The Ferengi trading post of Zeta Salvage Station drifted in the space between Federation and Romulan territories, a ramshackle collection of docking ports, merchant stalls, and questionable enterprises that existed in the legal gray area where 3 jurisdictions met and none claimed responsibility. It was the perfect place for information brokers, smugglers, and those who preferred to conduct business away from official scrutiny. It was also where Lex Luthor had requested to meet Quark, proprietor of the most profitable bar on Deep Space Nine and a Ferengi with connections that stretched across the quadrant. Quark sat in the private booth, his lobes twitching with anticipation mixed with healthy Ferengi caution. When a human who'd been working with the Romulans for 2 weeks suddenly reached out requesting a confidential business meeting, it could mean opportunity or disaster, and the 34th rule of acquisition made clear that war was good for business, but peace was good for profit. The door slid open, and Luthor entered flanked by 2 Romulan guards who swept the room with professional paranoia before positioning themselves outside. Luthor wore civilian clothes now, expensive by Romulan standards, perfectly tailored, projecting an image of success without ostentation. He'd learned quickly that in this universe, presentation mattered. Quark, Luthor said, settling into the booth across from the Ferengi with easy confidence. Thank you for making time for me. I understand you're a busy man. For someone who's got the entire Romulan military establishment eating out of his hand after 2 weeks. I can spare a few minutes. Quark signaled for drinks, Romulan ale for Luthor, Sluggo Cola for himself. Though I gotta say, when a human genius who could be living in Federation luxury chooses Romulan paranoia instead, it makes a Ferengi wonder what the profit angle is. Luthor smiled, accepting the ale. Direct. I appreciate that. The profit angle, as you put it, is simple. The Federation has eliminated scarcity, which means they've eliminated the fundamental driver of innovation. When everyone gets everything they need from replicators, when transporters make distance irrelevant, when holodeck fantasies substitute for actual achievement, what's left to strive for? Latinum, Quark said immediately. Can't replicate it, can't fake it, can't live without it. Exactly. Luthor leaned forward. Your people understood something the Federation forgot. That value requires scarcity. That achievement requires risk. That progress requires someone to win and someone to lose, because without that differential, there's no motivation to be exceptional. He sipped the ale, clearly having developed a taste for it. I'm here because I need what the Ferengi have and the Federation has abandoned, an economic system that rewards results over intentions. Quark's lobes practically vibrated with interest. You want to do business? What kind of business? The kind that operates in the spaces between official jurisdictions, Luthor said. The Romulans have given me resources to develop technology. But they control everything I create, monitor every interaction, restrict my access to information that might threaten their strategic position. They're useful, but they're also limiting. I need access to materials, information, and distribution networks that exist outside Romulan control. You want me to smuggle things for you? I want to hire you as a logistics consultant, Luthor corrected with a slight smile. Completely legal under Ferengi commerce regulations. You facilitate the acquisition and movement of materials between parties who prefer discretion. I pay you in technology that you can license to third parties, or in consultation services that help you optimize your existing business operations. Quark's expression shifted from interested to intrigued. What kind of technology? Luthor pulled out a data isolinear chip, sliding it across the table. That contains specifications for a replicator modification that increases efficiency by 18% while reducing power consumption by 23%. It's worth approximately 12,000 bars of latinum to any Ferengi entrepreneur with the capital to license it to the right buyers. Consider it a demonstration of what our partnership could look like. Quark snatched up the chip, his eyes gleaming. He'd have his brother Rom verify it, of course, but if this human was legitimate. Okay, you've got my attention. What do you need moved? Duranium processing equipment from Cardassia Prime. Isolinear optical chips from the Dopterian freighter network. Biomimetic gel from independent medical suppliers. Luthor rattled off a list of materials that made Quark's mental ledger spin with calculations. Nothing illegal by Federation standards, nothing weapons grade by Starfleet definitions, but everything restricted by Romulan import controls because they don't want me having independent resources. You're building something the Romulans don't know about. I'm building insurance, Luthor corrected. The Romulans are useful allies because they appreciate strategic thinking and reward results. But they're also treacherous by nature and will dispose of me the moment my utility expires. I need leverage that exists outside their control structure. And more importantly, I need to demonstrate to certain parties in the Federation that exceptionalism doesn't require government approval to achieve results. Quark leaned back, processing. This human was playing multiple angles simultaneously, using the Romulans for resources while building independent capabilities through Ferengi networks, all while sending a message to the Federation about the value of unregulated genius. It was exactly the kind of complicated, multi-party arbitrage that made Ferengi hearts sing. What's in it for me long-term? Quark asked. Because no offense, but humans from other dimensions don't have the best track record for reliability. Long-term, I'm going to prove that the Federation's economic model is unsustainable, Luthor said calmly. That a civilization built on post-scarcity principles will eventually stagnate because humans need competition to excel. When that happens, and it will, there will be a market for alternative systems. Systems that reward achievement, that value exceptionalism, that understand profit isn't a dirty word but a measurement of value creation. He met Quark's eyes directly. I'm offering you the opportunity to be on the ground floor of what comes after the Federation realizes its utopia was built on comfortable lies. Quark felt a chill run down his spine. This human wasn't just doing business, he was trying to reshape the quadrant's economic philosophy. And if he succeeded, the profit potential was astronomical. But if he failed, anyone associated with him would be caught in the fallout. I need to think about this, Quark said, though his tone suggested he was already calculating how to make it work. Of course. Luthor stood, preparing to leave. But while you're thinking, consider this, the Federation has Deep Space Nine operating as a strategic outpost in Bajoran space. They've got Starfleet presence, diplomatic missions, and cultural exchange programs. But do you know what they don't have? What? They don't have anyone asking what happens to Ferengi commerce if the wormhole ever becomes Federation-controlled territory. If Bajorans joins the Federation and DS9 becomes a purely Starfleet operation. Luthor's smile was knowing. But I've been thinking about it. And I have some ideas for how an enterprising Ferengi could protect his business interests against that particular future. Ideas that involve technology, political leverage, and strategic positioning that would make you invaluable to multiple parties simultaneously. Quark's mind raced. The wormhole to the Gamma Quadrant was the single most profitable discovery in Ferengi history. If the Federation ever fully controlled access. You're offering to help me hedge against Federation expansion. I'm offering to help you remain relevant in multiple possible futures, Luthor corrected. Because unlike the Federation, I understand that profit and security are two sides of the same latinum slip. And unlike the Romulans, I understand that partnerships work better than coercion. He moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Quark. Don't bother reporting this conversation to Starfleet. I'm counting on you doing exactly that. What? Why would you? Because I want them to know that I'm building networks they can't control. That their precious Federation ideals don't extend to independent traders and Ferengi entrepreneurs who understand that value requires exchange, not replication. Every time they try to track my activities through your operations, they'll be reminded that their post-scarcity paradise only works because they convinced everyone to stop wanting things that matter. Luthor's expression hardened slightly. And when they finally realized that human nature didn't evolve, it was just temporarily sedated by technological abundance, people like you and I will be there to rebuild what they abandoned. The door slid shut behind him, leaving Quark alone with a data chip worth a small fortune and a head full of possibilities that violated at least 17 rules of acquisition while simultaneously fulfilling the most important one, opportunity plus instinct equals profit. Quark sat there for a long moment, then activated his communicator. Quark to Rom, drop whatever you're doing and get to the station. I need you to verify some specs, and then we need to talk about the future of Ferengi commerce in a post-Federation galaxy. On the other end, Rom's nervous voice responded with confusion, but Quark barely heard it. He was too busy calculating the profit margins of betting on a human genius who seemed determined to tear down the economic foundation of the most powerful government in the Alpha Quadrant. It was insane. It was dangerous. It violated the 76th rule of acquisition, every once in a while, declare peace. It confuses the hell out of your enemies. But it also promised profits beyond anything Quark had imagined since stumbling onto the wormhole. And as the 162nd rule made clear, even in the worst of times, someone turns a profit. Quark intended to be that someone. Across the station, Luthor returned to the docking bay where his Romulan escorts waited. They hadn't heard the conversation, he'd made sure of that with a localized subspace dampening field built into the table, but they would report the meeting to their superiors. Which was fine. It was all part of the plan. The Romulans thought he was using them to prove his genius. The Ferengi thought he was using them to build independent resources. The Federation thought he was a philosophical threat to be contained through diplomatic pressure. They were all correct. And they were all missing the larger picture. Luthor gazed out the viewport at the stars, at the vast expanse of space filled with species competing for resources, territory, and survival. The Federation had tried to opt out of that competition through technology and philosophy. They'd built a utopia by convincing themselves that human nature could be transcended. But Luthor knew the truth. Human nature didn't transcend, it adapted, it waited, it found new expressions. And when the Federation finally faced a threat that their replicators couldn't solve and their diplomacy couldn't negotiate, when they needed someone willing to make the hard choices their principles prevented them from making, they would turn to people like him. Not because he was right. But because he was necessary. And necessity, Luthor reflected as the Romulan transport undocked, was the strongest argument of all. The subspace message reached Deep Space Nine through encrypted Ferengi commercial channels, but its intended recipient was neither Quark nor any of his business associates. Commander Benjamin Sisko read the decoded transmission in his office, his expression darkening with each line. Commander Sisko, you don't know me, but we share a common concern. A human named Lex Luthor is currently operating in Romulan space with the apparent goal of destabilizing the balance of power in this sector. However, his true objective is far more ambitious. He intends to prove that the Federation's philosophical foundation is fundamentally flawed. I have information about his background and capabilities that Starfleet Command may find useful. If you're willing to discuss this matter discreetly, I can be reached at the coordinates attached. Bruce Wayne. Sisko leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking in the quiet office. He'd heard the name Bruce Wayne, civilian contractor, temporal refugee from an alternate Earth, occasionally consulted by Starfleet on matters involving extraordinary individuals. That such a person would reach out directly, bypassing official channels, suggested this was more complicated than simple intelligence sharing. Dax, Sisko said, activating his comm badge. Join me in my office. And bring whatever you can find on a civilian named Bruce Wayne. Jadzia Dax arrived minutes later, a pad already in hand and curiosity dancing in her eyes. Bruce Wayne. Arrived through a temporal anomaly 5 years ago, claimed asylum, underwent extensive Starfleet debriefing. He's been living quietly on Earth, consulting occasionally on matters involving dimensional refugees and temporal mechanics. Clean record, significant personal wealth from technology patents he developed after arrival. She looked up. Why the interest? Sisko handed her the message. Dax read it quickly, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. This Luthor must be quite something if Wayne is going around Starfleet channels. Or Wayne has reasons for not wanting this to go through official channels, Sisko countered. Either way, if a human is actively working to undermine the Federation from within Romulan space, it's a problem that affects this station directly. We're already dealing with Dominion tensions in the Gamma Quadrant. We don't need the Romulans getting technological advantages that could force us to divert resources. He stood, decision made. Contact the Defiant crew. We're taking a trip to these coordinates. Quietly. 12 hours later, the USS Defiant dropped out of warp at the edge of an unnamed system in the Badlands, the plasma storms and magnetic interference that made the region a favorite of Maquis rebels and anyone else who preferred to avoid sensor detection. A small civilian transport sat in orbit around a barren moon, its transponder identifying it as a registered Federation vessel. Scanning the transport, Dax reported from Tactical. One human life sign. No weapons, minimal power signature. Either he's alone and unarmed, or he's very good at hiding things from sensors. Considering the source, I'd bet on the latter, Sisko muttered. Open a channel. Wayne's face appeared on the view screen, older and more weathered than his official images suggested. Commander Sisko. Thank you for coming. I apologize for the cloak and dagger approach, but what I need to discuss requires privacy that official channels can't guarantee. Section 31, Sisko said flatly. It wasn't a question. Among others, Wayne confirmed. May I come aboard? This conversation would be easier face to face. 10 minutes later, Wayne sat in the Defiant's cramped briefing room with Sisko, Dax, and Chief O'Brien, the engineer having been pulled from DS9 specifically because of his experience with unconventional technology and unorthodox thinking. Luthor has made contact with the Tal Shiar, Wayne began without preamble. Specifically, with Colonel Loveck, who is, according to intelligence that I've pieced together from multiple sources, actually a founder. The room went silent. O'Brien spoke first, his Irish accent thickening with tension. A founder? As in, a changeling? Running Romulan intelligence? Infiltrated years ago, possibly before the Dominion even revealed itself, Wayne confirmed. Which means that every piece of technology Luthor provides to the Romulans may actually be going directly to the founders. And given Luthor's genius and his complete lack of knowledge about the Dominion threat, he let the implication hang. Dax leaned forward, her Trill symbiont centuries of experience evident in her measured tone. You're saying Luthor could inadvertently give the Dominion access to dimensional rift technology, advanced weapons systems, and strategic intelligence about the Federation, all while thinking he's just playing Romulan politics. I'm saying he might already have, Wayne said grimly. 3 days ago, I intercepted communications suggesting that Luthor has been given access to Luthor's research facility on Novana 3. That facility is where Luthor is attempting to recreate the dimensional rift that brought him here. If a founder gains the ability to access alternate realities, to potentially recruit versions of themselves from universes where the Dominion won, where the Federation fell, he met Sisko's eyes. Commander, you fought the Dominion. You know what they're capable of. Now imagine them with access to infinite variations of themselves. Sisko felt ice settle in his chest. The Dominion was already the greatest threat the Alpha Quadrant had faced in generations. The idea of them gaining multidimensional capability. Why hasn't Starfleet intelligence detected this? Why hasn't Section 31? Because Luthor is operating in Romulan space using Romulan resources, and our intelligence networks inside the Romulan Empire have been systematically compromised by founder infiltration, Wayne said. Section 31 is chasing shadows while the real threat is hiding in plain sight, wearing the face of a Romulan colonel and getting handed reality-breaking technology by a human who thinks he's just proving a philosophical point about exceptionalism. O'Brien shook his head. This is insane. We need to extract Luthor immediately, bring him back to Federation space where he can't do any more damage. Can't, Wayne said. First, he's in Romulan territory, and any extraction attempt would require violating their sovereignty, which could trigger exactly the kind of incident that would benefit the Dominion. Second, Luthor went to the Romulans voluntarily. He genuinely believes his philosophy, genuinely thinks the Federation is wrong. If we force him back, we prove his point about the Federation imposing its will when convenient. Third, Wayne's expression hardened, I'm not entirely sure extraction is possible. Luthor's been working with Romulan technology for weeks now. He's had access to their cloak systems, their security protocols, their intelligence networks. If he doesn't want to be found, I'm not confident we could locate him. Then what do you propose? Sisko asked. We need someone inside, Wayne said. Someone Luthor would talk to, someone who could get close enough to understand what he's really building and whether Luthor is actually a founder. Someone who could appeal to Luthor's ego while gathering intelligence. He paused. Someone he would see as a worthy opponent, an intellectual equal who challenges his philosophy rather than just opposing it. Dax caught on first. You want Commander Sisko to meet with him. Appeal to his sense of, what, fair play. Intellectual honesty. I want Commander Sisko to challenge him, Wayne corrected. Luthor respects strength, intelligence, and conviction. He'll dismiss Starfleet diplomats as bureaucrats, ignore intelligence operatives as beneath his notice. But a Starfleet commander who's fought impossible odds, who's made hard choices, who's defended principles while getting his hands dirty. Wayne looked at Sisko directly. That's someone Luthor might actually engage with honestly, because that's someone who represents the contradiction he's trying to expose, exceptional individuals operating within a system that supposedly rejects exceptionalism. Sisko bristled. I'm not bait for your psychological operation, Mr. Wayne. I'm not asking you to be bait, Wayne said. I'm asking you to do what you do best, find the third option that nobody else sees. Luthor thinks he's facing a binary choice. Prove the Federation wrong or be forced to accept their philosophy. You've spent years on DS9 finding solutions that transcend binary choices. Negotiating with Cardassians while protecting Bajorans. Defending Federation principles while working with former Maquis. Operating a Starfleet station while respecting Bajoran sovereignty. Mr. Wayne, Sisko said coldly, if you're suggesting I abandon Starfleet principles to play philosophical games with someone who's potentially arming the Dominion. I'm suggesting you remind him what Starfleet principles actually mean, Wayne interrupted. Not the idealized version he's attacking, but the messy, complicated reality of people trying to do the right thing in impossible circumstances. Luthor thinks the Federation is naive idealists who'll crumble when reality intrudes. Show him a Starfleet officer who's faced reality and didn't crumble. Who made the hard choices and lived with the consequences. Who understands that principles aren't about purity, they're about staying true to your values even when it costs you something. The briefing room fell silent except for the hum of the Defiance engines. Sisko considered the proposal from every angle, looking for the trap, the manipulation, the hidden agenda. But he couldn't find one. Wayne wasn't asking him to compromise, wasn't suggesting deception. He was asking Sisko to be exactly who he was, a Starfleet commander who'd learned that defending the Federation sometimes meant operating in spaces where regulations and ideals met uncomfortable reality. How would we even arrange a meeting? Sisko asked, not quite agreeing but no longer refusing. Luthor reached out to Quark, Wayne said. Which means he's been monitoring DS9, tracking your operations. He knows who you are, Commander. He knows about the wormhole, the Dominion, the choices you've had to make. If you send him a message, direct, honest, challenging him to defend his philosophy against someone who's actually lived the life he claims to understand, he'll respond. His ego won't let him resist. O'Brien spoke up. And if this is all a setup? If he's working with the Founders knowingly, if this is all part of some larger Dominion strategy? Then we learn that, Wayne said simply. But I don't think he is. I think Luthor is exactly what he appears to be, a brilliant man convinced that his philosophy is correct and willing to prove it at any cost. The tragedy isn't that he's evil. It's that he's sincere. Dax met Sisko's eyes, and he saw his own conflicted thoughts reflected there. This was exactly the kind of morally complicated situation that made him uncomfortable, operating in shadows, making diplomatic contact with someone actively working against Federation interests, potentially putting himself at risk for intelligence gathering that might not even work. It was also exactly the kind of situation where Benjamin Sisko had learned he was at his best. All right, Sisko said finally. I'll send the message. But Mr. Wayne, I want you to understand something. I'm not doing this to manipulate Luthor or to run some intelligence operation. If I'm going to challenge his philosophy, I'm going to do it honestly, openly, and with the conviction that the Federation's principles are worth defending not because they're perfect, but because they're the best system we've found for balancing individual rights with collective good. Wayne smiled slightly. Commander, that's exactly why you're the right person to do this. Luthor has spent weeks surrounded by people who either worship his genius or fear his capabilities. He needs to meet someone who sees him clearly, brilliance and flaws both, and still believes the Federation's way is better. Wayne stood, preparing to leave. Just remember, you're not trying to convince him he's wrong. You're trying to make him question whether he's as right as he thinks he is. After Wayne departed, Sisko sat alone in the briefing room, contemplating the message he would send. How do you challenge someone who's already thought of every counterargument? How do you defend principles that look like weakness to someone who measures worth by results? The answer, Sisko realized, wasn't to defend the Federation as a perfect system. It was to defend it as a human system, flawed, struggling, sometimes failing, but always striving to be better than what came before. To remind Luthor that exceptionalism without compassion was just another form of tyranny, no matter how benevolent. Computer, Sisko said finally. Record message. Encrypt with Starfleet Command cipher, route through Ferengi commercial networks to Romulan space, attention Lex Luthor. The computer chirped acknowledgement. Sisko took a breath, then began, Mr. Luthor, my name is Benjamin Sisko. I'm the commanding officer of Deep Space Nine, and I understand you've been having interesting conversations about the nature of exceptionalism and the role of extraordinary individuals in society. I'd like to have that conversation with you, not as an official Starfleet negotiation, but as one person who's made impossible choices to another. Because I think you're right about one thing, the Federation does have exceptional individuals. We just disagree about what they should do with that exceptionalism. If you're willing to defend your philosophy against someone who's actually lived in the spaces between ideals and reality, I'll be at the coordinates attached. Alone, unarmed, and willing to listen. Sisko out. He sent the message and sat back, wondering if he'd just made a brilliant move or a terrible mistake. 48 hours later, he received a response that consisted of 3 words. I accept. Luthor. The meeting location Luthor specified was an abandoned Federation science outpost on the border of the Caleb sector, territory that had technically been ceded to neither the Federation nor the Romulan Empire after a border dispute 30 years ago left it in legal limbo. The outpost's automated system still functioned, providing life support and basic amenities, but it had been abandoned when the research project studying subspace anomalies in the region lost funding. Sisko arrived alone aboard a runabout, as promised. The Defiant waited 3 light-years away with orders to come running if he didn't check in every 2 hours. It wasn't much of a safety net, but it was all the compromise he could make between caution and the genuine meeting Luthor had requested. The outpost's transporter pad shimmered, and Sisko materialized in what had once been a bustling research facility. Now it was a ghost station, corridors lit by emergency lighting, dust-coating surfaces that hadn't been touched in years, the slight metallic taste in the air that came from recycled atmosphere running on minimal power. Luthor was already there, standing in the observation lounge with his back to the entrance, gazing out at the swirling purple and green nebula that dominated the view. He wore simple civilian clothes, no Romulan military styling, no obvious technology beyond a personal communicator. For the first time since entering this universe, he looked almost vulnerable. Commander Sisko, Luthor said without turning. Thank you for coming. I half expected Starfleet to send a security team despite your promise. I keep my word, Sisko said, moving to stand beside him at the window. Even when keeping it might be tactically questionable. And that, in a nutshell, is why I wanted to speak with you. Luthor finally turned to face him. Up close, Sisko could see the intelligence burning in those green eyes, but also something else, exhaustion, perhaps, or the weight of constantly calculating. You're the exception that proves my rule, Commander. An exceptional individual operating within a system that supposedly doesn't need exceptional individuals. How do you reconcile that? By not accepting your premise, Sisko said. I'm not exceptional. I'm a Starfleet officer doing his job in difficult circumstances. The fact that those circumstances require hard choices doesn't make me special, it makes the situation special. Luthor smiled, but it was tinged with something like disappointment. You're too modest. You're the emissary to the Bajoran people, a religious figure to an entire world. You've made decisions that cost lives to save more lives. You've operated in moral gray areas that most Starfleet officers never touch. You've been willing to sacrifice your comfort, your principles, even parts of your soul to protect what you believe in. That's not just doing your job, Commander. That's exceptionalism, whether you want to admit it or not. Sisko felt the accuracy of the assessment like a physical blow. Luthor had done his research, understood not just the facts but the weight they carried. Yes, I've made hard choices. Yes, I've compromised and struggled and sometimes failed to live up to the ideals I'm supposed to represent. But that's not exceptionalism, that's being human. And the difference between us, Mr. Luthor, is that I don't think my struggles give me the right to tell everyone else how to live. Don't you? Luthor moved away from the window, beginning to pace with restless energy. You're the commander of the most strategically important location in the Alpha Quadrant. You make decisions every day that affect billions of lives. When you choose to defend Bajorans, when you choose to resist the Dominion, when you choose which principles to uphold and which to compromise, you're telling everyone in your sphere of influence how to live. You're exercising power, Commander, even if you dress it up in Starfleet regulations and Federation ideals. There's a difference between making necessary decisions within a system of accountability and declaring yourself above that system because you think you know better. Is there? Luthor stopped pacing, facing Sisko directly. Tell me about Vreenak. Sisko's blood ran cold. Vreenak, The Romulan senator he'd helped Benjamin Sisko in an operation that had cost the senator his life, an operation that had brought the Romulans into the Dominion War on the Federation's side through manufactured evidence. It was the darkest moment of Sisko's career, a choice that haunted him even as he recognized its necessity. "How do you know about that?" Sisko asked quietly. "Because I'm thorough," Luthor said. "Because I've spent weeks analyzing Starfleet's strategic decisions, looking for the patterns beneath the propaganda. And because I recognize the signature of someone who made a choice that their system would never officially condone but tacitly required." He moved closer. "You participated in an assassination, Commander. You falsified evidence to manipulate an entire empire into war. You did it because you believed the ends justified the means, because you concluded that millions of lives were worth more than your personal integrity or Starfleet's precious principles." "I did it because I had no other choice," Sisko said, his voice hard. "And I live with that choice every day. It doesn't make me proud. It doesn't make me exceptional. It makes me someone who failed to find a better way. Or it makes you someone who had the courage to do what needed to be done while everyone else hid behind regulations." Luthor's tone softened slightly. "Commander, I'm not trying to condemn you. I'm trying to make you see what you represent, the living proof that the Federation's ideals are luxuries it can only afford when the stakes aren't high enough. You're exceptional not because you're smarter or stronger than other officers, but because you're willing to bear the weight of necessary evil so others can maintain their illusions of purity." Sisko felt anger rising, hot and righteous. "You think that's what I am? A hypocrite who pretends to believe in principles while violating them? I think you're honest enough to recognize that sometimes principles have to bend or millions die," Luthor said. "And I think the Federation uses people like you, exceptional individuals willing to operate in the shadows, while publicly maintaining that such exceptionalism isn't necessary. They get the benefits of your hard choices while denying the philosophy that makes those choices possible. The philosophy that some people are simply better and should rule. The philosophy that some people are capable of making decisions others can't, and that pretending otherwise is a comfortable lie," Luthor corrected. He moved to a dusty table, activating a portable holographic display. "Look at this. This is Deep Space Nine's strategic value, the wormhole, the location, the political significance. One station, Commander. One location that's so vital that the entire quadrant's power balance pivots on it. And who controls it? You. One person making daily decisions that could trigger interstellar war or preserve fragile peace." The hologram showed tactical projections, political maps, resource flows, all centered on DS9. "Now imagine if your decisions were subject to democratic consensus," Luthor continued. "Imagine if every time the Dominion threatened, every time the Cardassians maneuvered, every time Bajoran religious politics complicated your operations, imagine if you had to submit your response to a committee vote. How many crises would escalate while you waited for consensus? How many lives would be lost while people who don't understand the situation debated the proper course of action? That's why we have command structure," Sisko said. "That's why we train officers to make good decisions and trust them with authority. But that authority comes with accountability. With oversight. With the understanding that no one, no matter how brilliant, is infallible. And when the oversight is wrong?" Luthor pressed. "When the regulations prevent the right action? When the committee's consensus is to do nothing while people die because taking action would violate the Prime Directive or set dangerous precedents?" He pulled up another display, casualty figures from various Federation border conflicts. How many of these could have been prevented by exceptional individuals making unilateral decisions? How many died because the Federation's system of checks and balances prevented anyone from acting decisively? Sisko stared at the numbers, feeling the weight of each life represented. And how many would have died if we abandoned those checks and balances? If we decided that brilliant people should have unilateral authority because they think they know best? History is full of exceptional individuals who started with noble intentions and ended as tyrants. History is also full of democratic systems that couldn't respond to crises fast enough and collapsed into chaos, Luthor countered. The question isn't whether exceptionalism can be abused, of course it can. The question is whether the fear of that abuse should prevent us from acknowledging that some people genuinely are better equipped to lead than others. Better equipped, maybe, Sisko said. But that doesn't give them the right. Because the moment you say that intelligence or capability justifies power without consent, you've created a system where the strong rule the weak. And that's not civilization, Mr. Luthor. That's just sophisticated barbarism dressed in philosophical rhetoric. Luthor was quiet for a long moment, studying Sisko with that penetrating gaze. You believe that? You genuinely believe that collective mediocrity is preferable to exceptional leadership? I believe that collective wisdom, even when it's slower and messier, is more trustworthy than individual brilliance, Sisko said. Because brilliance without humility is just arrogance. And arrogance, no matter how intelligent, always believes it knows better than the people it's supposedly saving. Even when it does no better. Especially when it does, Sisko said firmly. Because the moment you decide that knowing better gives you the right to impose your will, you've stopped serving humanity and started ruling it. And Mr. Luthor, I've seen enough rulers, Cardassian, Dominion, even human, to know that benevolent dictatorship is still dictatorship. Luthor turned away, returning to the window and the swirling nebula beyond. When he spoke again, his voice carried something Sisko hadn't heard before, doubt. In my universe, I fought gods, Luthor said quietly. Beings with power beyond comprehension, who made decisions for humanity without consent because they believed their power gave them the right. And I fought them not because I thought they were wrong about everything, but because I couldn't accept humanity living at the mercy of beings who didn't need our permission to shape our world. He glanced back at Sisko. Your Federation has created a different kind of god, Commander. A system so large, so bureaucratic, so committed to consensus that individual humans are just components in a vast machine. You're free, yes. You're equal, yes. But are you still human when your drives, your ambitions, your very exceptionalism is smoothed away by replicators and regulations and the constant message that wanting to be more than average is somehow wrong? We're still human, Sisko said. We just decided that being human means caring for each other, not competing with each other. That our worth comes from what we contribute to the whole, not from dominating individuals we're stronger or smarter than. And when the Borg come? Luthor asked. When the Dominion invades? When threats emerge that your collective wisdom can't handle fast enough? What then? Then people like me make the hard choices, Sisko said. And we live with the consequences. And we hope that the system we're protecting is worth the pieces of ourselves we lose defending it. He moved to stand beside Luthor at the window. You asked how I reconcile being exceptional within a system that doesn't need exceptional individuals. I don't. I just do my job, make the best choices I can, and trust that the people I serve will hold me accountable when I'm wrong. That's not hypocrisy, Mr. Luthor. That's the messy reality of trying to live up to principles that are bigger than any individual. They stood in silence, two men from different universes, different philosophies, staring at the same stars and seeing entirely different meanings. Finally, Luthor spoke. I can't accept your philosophy, Commander. I can't believe that humanity's future lies in comfortable equality rather than striving for excellence. But I respect that you've actually lived in the tension between ideals and reality. That you've paid the price for your principles rather than just preaching them from comfort. He turned to face Sisko directly. Which is why I'm going to tell you something that nobody else knows. Not the Romulans, not the Federation, not even the Ferengi I've been dealing with. Sisko waited, instinct screaming that whatever came next would change everything. Colonel Lothar, the Tal Shir operative who's been my primary contact in Romulan intelligence, is not Romulan, Luthor said flatly. He's a changeling. A founder from the Dominion. And he's been using me to gain access to dimensional rift technology that could give the Dominion access to infinite realities. Luthor's expression was grim. I suspected 3 days ago. Confirmed it yesterday when I caught him in a microscopic inconsistency, Romulans have a specific response to certain electromagnetic frequencies that affects their neural chemistry. Luthor had no response at all. Because he's not Romulan. He's a shapeshifter playing one. Sisko felt the world tilt. You're telling me you've been working with a founder? Giving the Dominion access to technology that could end the Alpha Quadrant, Luthor finished. Yes. Which is why I'm telling you now, before he realizes I know, before the Dominion gets what they want. That's the messy reality of trying to live up to principles that are bigger than any individual. They stood in silence, two men from different universes, different philosophies, staring at the same stars and seeing entirely different meanings. Finally, Luthor spoke. I can't accept your philosophy, Commander. I can't believe that humanity's future lies in comfortable equality rather than striving for excellence. But I respect that you've actually lived in the tension between ideals and reality. That you've paid the price for your principles rather than just preaching them from comfort. He turned to face Sisko directly. Which is why I'm going to tell you something that nobody else knows. Not the Romulans, not the Federation, not even the Ferengi I've been dealing with. Sisko waited, instincts screaming that whatever came next would change everything. Colonel Luthor, the Tal Shiar operative who's been my primary contact in Romulan intelligence, is not Romulan, Luthor said flatly. He's a changeling. A founder from the Dominion. And he's been using me to gain access to dimensional rift technology that could give the Dominion access to infinite realities. Luthor's expression was grim. I suspected 3 days ago. Confirmed it yesterday when I caught him in a microscopic inconsistency. Romulans have a specific response to certain electromagnetic frequencies that affects their neural chemistry. Luthor had no response at all. Because he's not Romulan. He's a shapeshifter playing one. Sisko felt the world tilt. You're telling me you've been working with a founder? Giving the Dominion access to technology that could end the Alpha Quadrant, Luthor finished. Yes. Which is why I'm telling you now, before he realizes I know, before the Dominion gets what they want. Because as much as I disagree with your philosophy, Commander, I'm not interested in handing reality-breaking technology to an empire of shapeshifters who want to impose order on the galaxy through subjugation. Why? Sisko demanded. Why tell me this? Why not just disappear, protect yourself? Luthor smiled, but it was weary. Because exceptional individuals don't just pursue their own survival, Commander. They take responsibility for their mistakes. And working with what I thought was Romulan intelligence without realizing I was actually working with the Dominion. That's a mistake that could cost billions of lives. He moved toward the transporter pad. You have 48 hours before Luthor expects me to complete the dimensional rift prototype. Use them wisely. And Commander? When this is over, when you've stopped the Dominion from gaining multidimensional capability, remember that it took an exceptional individual operating outside your system to give you the intelligence necessary to act. Where are you going? Sisko asked. Back to Romulan space, Luthor said. To play the role of loyal genius for 48 more hours while you figure out how to stop a founder who's embedded in their intelligence apparatus. And then, assuming we all survive, I'm going to disappear into the spaces between governments and prove my philosophy the only way that matters, by building something that works better than what the Federation has built. Luthor. 48 hours, Commander. Don't waste them trying to rescue me from choices I made freely. Just stop the Dominion. And maybe, when this is over, ask yourself whether your system could have discovered what I discovered, acted as quickly as I acted, or made the choice I'm making now. He stepped onto the pad. Because I think you'll find that exceptionalism, when properly directed, isn't the threat to your civilization. It's the only thing that can save it when principles aren't enough. The transporter activated, and Luthor dissolved into golden light, leaving Sisko alone in the abandoned outpost with intelligence that could change the war in 48 hours to act on it. Sisko activated his comm badge with trembling fingers. Sisko to Defiant. Emergency extraction. And get me a secure channel to Starfleet Command. We have a founder in Romulan intelligence, and the clock is ticking. Starfleet Command's response to Sisko's intelligence was immediate and overwhelming. Within 6 hours, the Enterprise D, the Defiant, and 2 additional starships had assembled at coordinates just outside the Romulan neutral zone. Admiral Nechayev herself had taken command of the operation from the USS Gorkin, and the briefing room aboard that vessel now held some of the finest strategic minds in Starfleet. And one civilian consultant who predicted this exact scenario. Mr. Wayne was correct, Admiral Nechayev said, her tone suggesting she took no pleasure in the admission. Our intelligence confirms that Colonel Lovick has been operating in Romulan space for at least 18 months. He's had access to their most sensitive military projects, their strategic planning, their intelligence on Federation deployments. And now, thanks to Lex Luthor, he's 48 hours away from having dimensional rift technology. Captain Picard stood at the tactical display, his fingers steepled in thought. The question becomes, how do we stop him without triggering an interstellar incident? We cannot simply invade Romulan space to apprehend a changeling they don't know exists. We could inform the Romulans, suggested Captain Keogh of the USS Odyssey. Present them with the evidence, let them handle their own security breach. And risk them refusing to believe us, or worse, covering it up to avoid admitting their intelligence apparatus was compromised, Nechayev countered. The Romulans would rather die than show weakness to the Federation. Sisko leaned forward. There's another option. Luthor is still inside. He knows he's working with a founder, and he's buying us time by pretending he doesn't know. If we can get a message to him. Absolutely not, Nechayev cut him off. We are not coordinating with someone who spent the last month arming our enemies and undermining Federation philosophy. With respect, Admiral, Picard interjected, his diplomatic tone barely masking disagreement, Mr. Luthor has provided us with intelligence that our entire intelligence network failed to acquire. And according to Commander Sisko's report, he did so knowing it would end his relationship with the Romulans and likely put him in considerable danger. Whatever his philosophical disagreements with the Federation, he has demonstrated that when faced with a genuine threat, he chose to act in our mutual interest. Bruce Wayne spoke for the first time. Luthor is trying to prove a point. He's demonstrating that exceptional individuals can see threats that systems miss, can act decisively when committees would debate, can make choices that serve the greater good even at personal cost. If we ignore his contribution or refuse to work with him because he doesn't fit our philosophical comfort zone, we're proving his argument for him. I don't care about proving or disproving his philosophy, Nechayev said sharply. I care about stopping the Dominion from gaining access to infinite realities. Captain Picard, you know Romulan psychology better than anyone here. How do we approach this? Picard considered carefully. The Romulans value strength, strategy, and above all, information they believe others don't possess. If we were to transmit intelligence to their high command, carefully worded to suggest we have deep sources within their military but without revealing those sources, they might investigate Lovick themselves. The key would be making them believe the discovery was their own. A setup, Sisko said. We feed them information that points to Lovick's irregularities, let them conduct their own investigation, and when they discover he's a changeling, they'll liquidate him immediately and claim credit for uncovering Dominion infiltration, Picard finished. It preserves their pride while eliminating the threat. Data, who had been processing tactical scenarios at quantum speeds, spoke up from his position at the secondary console. Captain, there is a 73% probability that any investigation of Lovick will prompt him to accelerate his timetable. If he believes discovery is imminent, he may attempt to steal Luthor's research and flee to Dominion space. We would lose both the Founder and the dimensional rift technology. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Wayne stood, moving to the tactical display. Then we need someone inside the facility who can sabotage the dimensional rift prototype before Lovick realizes he's compromised. Someone who understands the technology well enough to destroy it completely while making it look like a catastrophic accident. Luthor, Sisko said. He's already inside. He built the damn thing. He could destroy it in a way that would seem like a containment failure. Except we have no way to communicate with him securely, Nechayev pointed out. Any transmission to Nirvana 3 would be monitored by Romulan intelligence, which means Luthor would intercept it. Not necessarily, Geordi LaForge said, studying the technical readouts. The dimensional rift research creates massive subspace interference. It's like trying to hold a conversation next to a warp core breach, everything gets drowned out by the noise. If we transmitted on a very specific frequency, one that would be absorbed by the dimensional rift energy signature itself, we could piggyback a message that would only be detectable to someone inside the facility who knew exactly what frequency to monitor. And how would Luthor know what frequency to monitor? Keo asked skeptically. Wayne smiled slightly. Because he's Lex Luthor. He's been operating in an alien empire for weeks, working with technology he'd never seen before. You think he hasn't been monitoring every possible communication frequency as a security measure? The man built contingencies into his power armor back when he was fighting Superman. He'll have contingencies here too. Picard nodded slowly. It's a risk. But given the alternatives. Make it happen, Nechayev ordered. But I want a backup plan. If Luthor doesn't or can't destroy the prototype, we need to be ready to act decisively. Admiral, Picard said carefully, are you suggesting a military strike on Romulan territory? I'm suggesting we be prepared for all contingencies, Captain. Nechayev's expression was iron. The Federation has faced existential threats before. The Borg. The Dominion. If we have to violate Romulan sovereignty to prevent the Dominion from gaining multidimensional capability, then that's a choice we'll make and live with the consequences. Sisko met Picard's eyes across the room, and something passed between them, the shared understanding of officers who'd been forced to make impossible choices, who knew that sometimes principles had to bend or the civilization built on those principles would fall. This was exactly what Luthor had been talking about. The moment when ideals met reality and someone had to decide which was more important. 6 hours later, a precisely calibrated subspace transmission burst toward Nirvana 3 on a frequency that would be invisible to anyone not specifically looking for it, buried in the electromagnetic chaos of dimensional rift energy signatures. The message was brief. Luthor is founder. Destroy prototype. Extraction impossible. You have 6 hours before Romulan investigation reaches your facility. Make it count. Sisko. On Nirvana 3, Lex Luthor stood in the main laboratory, watching as the dimensional rift prototype hummed with barely contained power. It was beautiful in its complexity, a fusion of his Earth technology, Romulan engineering, and principles of subspace physics that this universe had barely begun to understand. In another week, with refinements, it could tear controlled openings between realities, could access infinite variations of this universe where different choices had led to different outcomes. It could change everything. The subspace receiver he'd built into his personal communicator, a device the Romulans had cleared because they didn't understand half of what it could do, chirped softly with an incoming transmission on a frequency that shouldn't exist in this universe. Luthor pulled it out, read the message, and smiled grimly. 6 hours. Romulan investigation. The Federation had moved faster than he'd expected, which meant Sisko had taken his intelligence seriously. Good. The man had spine. Dr. Luthor, a familiar voice said from the entrance. Colonel Luthor entered, his Romulan features arranged in an expression of cool professionalism. The High Command is pleased with your progress. They're requesting a demonstration of the dimensional rift within the next 6 hours. Luthor turned, meeting those alien eyes and seeing them clearly for the first time. Not Romulan. Not even trying that hard to maintain the illusion now that the endgame was approaching. The Founder was preparing to take what it needed and disappear. 6 hours is aggressive, Luthor said calmly. The containment fields need calibration, the power matrix requires. 6 hours, Doctor. Loveck's tone carried an edge now. Unless there's some reason you need more time. They stared at each other, two beings from different realities, different philosophies, and Luthor saw the calculation behind those borrowed eyes. The founder suspected. Maybe not certainty, but enough doubt to accelerate the timeline. No reason at all, Luthor said smoothly. I'll begin the activation sequence immediately. Though I should warn you, the energy release during the initial rift opening will be substantial. I'd recommend evacuating all non-essential personnel from the facility. Already arranged, Lovick said. I'll be observing from the command center. I trust you'll make this demonstration memorable. After the founder left, Luthor returned to the prototype, his fingers dancing across the control interface. 6 hours. Enough time to do what needed to be done, but not enough to be subtle about it. He pulled up the dimensional rift equations, the calculations that had brought him to this universe accidentally and could now be used intentionally. And then, with the precision of someone who'd spent a lifetime building weapons designed to kill gods, he began introducing errors into the system. Not obvious ones. Not the kind that would show up on diagnostic scans or safety checks. But fundamental errors in the containment field equations, small mistakes in the power distribution algorithms, tiny flaws that would compound upon each other until the entire system reached critical cascade failure. The rift would open, exactly as promised. It would tear through dimensions, exactly as designed. And then it would collapse catastrophically, destroying the prototype, the research facility, and potentially everything within a 50-kilometer radius. Including himself, if he didn't time the evacuation perfectly. Luthor worked through the calculations, adjusting variables, ensuring that the failure would be complete and spectacular enough that even the founder's shape-shifting abilities wouldn't save it if it stayed too close to ground zero. This had to end the research permanently, no salvageable technology, no recoverable data, nothing that could be reconstructed. 4 hours later, as Romulan military transports began evacuating personnel under the guise of security protocols, Luthor activated the dimensional rift sequence. The prototype flared to life, energies that had no business existing in this reality swirling into existence, tearing at the fabric of spacetime itself. In the command center, Lovick watched the readings with satisfaction, not recognizing the subtle discrepancies that meant doom. The founder saw success, saw the opening of infinite realities, saw the Dominion's future dominance secured. What it didn't see was Lex Luthor quietly activating his communicator, sending a simple 3-word message to the frequencies he'd calculated Starfleet would be monitoring. Get clear. Now. Then he turned to face the dimensional rift as it began to collapse ahead of schedule, as the containment field started to fail exactly as he designed them to, as reality itself began screaming in protest at the violation of its fundamental laws. Luthor had spent his life fighting beings who thought their power gave them the right to shape the world. He'd fought them with intelligence, with determination, with the absolute conviction that humanity didn't need gods or rulers or exceptional leaders imposing their will. The irony that his final act in this universe was exactly that kind of exceptional leadership, making a unilateral decision that would cost him everything to save billions, was not lost on him. Well, Superman, Luthor muttered to a ghost from another reality, looks like we finally found something we'd agree on. Some fights are worth dying for. The dimensional rift collapsed. The explosion was visible from orbit, a sphere of exotic energy that consumed the research facility, the surrounding territory, and everything within a 100-kilometer radius before collapsing in on itself with a sound like reality screaming. When it faded, there was nothing left but a crater of fused rock and twisted metal, still glowing with residual dimensional energy. Aboard the Gorkin, sensors registered the detonation. Admiral Nechayev stared at the readings, her expression unreadable. Did he, Sisko started, then couldn't finish the question. Subspace interference is clearing, data reported. Scanning for life signs. I am detecting nothing. The dimensional rift collapse was total. No survivors within the blast radius. Picard closed his eyes briefly. And Colonel Lovick? His command center was within the primary blast zone, data confirmed. If he was present, he would have been unable to shape-shift quickly enough to escape the dimensional energy cascade. The exotic radiation would have disrupted his cellular cohesion at the molecular level. The bridge fell silent. Outside, the stars burned with indifferent beauty. So he did it, Riker said quietly. He destroyed his own work, killed a founder, and sacrificed himself to protect a civilization whose philosophy he rejected. Wayne stood at the back of the bridge, his expression complicated. He proved his point. Exceptional individual, acting unilaterally, making the choice that needed to be made. He saved billions through genius and sacrifice while your democratic systems were still debating the proper protocols for addressing the threat. He looked at Nechayev. And now you have to decide what that means. It means, Picard said before the Admiral could respond, that Mr. Luthor understood something fundamental that he claimed the Federation had forgotten. That principles are worth dying for. That protecting others sometimes requires sacrificing yourself. That exceptionalism isn't about ruling, it's about service. He moved to the viewport, gazing at the still glowing crater. He argued that the Federation had abandoned exceptionalism. But in the end, he demonstrated that the most exceptional act is giving everything for people who will never know your name, never understand your sacrifice, and never build monuments to your memory. That's not the exceptionalism of rulers and tyrants. That's the exceptionalism of heroes. Sisko joined him at the window. He would have hated that analysis. Perhaps, Picard agreed. Or perhaps, in his final moments, he understood what we've been trying to tell him all along. That true exceptionalism isn't about being better than others. It's about making others better by your example. Nechayev's voice was quiet but firm. We'll need to brief the Romulan High Command. Tell them that their facility suffered a catastrophic accident during experimental research. That there were no survivors. They'll suspect, of course, but without evidence. They'll accept the explanation because the alternative is admitting they were infiltrated by the Dominion, Sisko finished. And we all maintain the comfortable fiction of an accident rather than face the uncomfortable truth. That's diplomacy, Commander, Nechayev said. Messy, imperfect, but better than war. It's what Luthor died to protect, Picard said. The right of civilizations to find their own path, free from Dominion control or exceptional individuals deciding what's best for everyone else. He disagreed with that choice. But he died defending it anyway. Wayne moved to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, captains, I think he would have appreciated the irony. Spent his whole life arguing that exceptionalism should rule, then proved that exceptionalism's highest calling is sacrifice for the collective good. He looked back at the crater on the view screen. Maybe that's the third option neither of us saw coming. Not exceptionalism versus equality, but exceptionalism in service of equality. Exceptional individuals choosing to use their gifts not to rule, but to protect. Not to impose, but to enable. After Wayne left, Sisko and Picard stood together in silence, watching the remnants of Lex Luthor's final act slowly cool in the void of space. Do you think he was right? Sisko asked finally. About the Federation? About exceptionalism? I think, Picard said carefully, that he was right that we need exceptional individuals. But he was wrong about what they should do with that exceptionalism. The Federation doesn't suppress greatness. It channels it toward service rather than dominance. And sometimes, that service requires sacrifice. He turned to Sisko. You made a similar choice with Vreenak. Different circumstances, different methods, but the same fundamental decision, to bear the weight of necessary evil so others could remain innocent. And that makes it right. It makes it human, Picard said. Flawed, struggling, trying our best to balance ideals with reality. Which is all any of us can do, exceptional or not. The stars turned silently outside, bearing witness to another name that would never be recorded in official histories, another sacrifice made in the endless work of preserving the fragile experiment called civilization. 3 months after the incident at Nelvana 3, Captain Picard found himself in a small cafe on Earth, sitting across from Bruce Wayne and Commander Sisko. The meeting was unofficial, off the record, and completely coincidental according to anyone who might inquire. In reality, it had been carefully arranged through channels that didn't officially exist. The Romulans have been quiet, Sisko observed, stirring his Ractigino absently. Too quiet. They accepted the accident explanation, recalled their research teams from border facilities, and haven't made a single aggressive move in 3 months. They're rattled, Wayne said. They know something went wrong at Nelvana 3 that wasn't just an accident. They suspect Dominion infiltration but can't prove it without admitting their intelligence apparatus was compromised. So they're consolidating, purging anyone they're not absolutely certain about, and waiting to see what we do next. Picard sipped his Earl Grey, contemplating the irony of sitting here discussing the aftermath of events that officially never happened. Starfleet intelligence reports that Dominion activity along the border has decreased as well. Whatever Luthor was planning, his loss has forced them to reconsider their approach. For now, Sisko said grimly. But they'll adapt. They always do. The conversation lapsed into silence, each man lost in his own thoughts about the human who'd entered their universe with revolutionary technology and dangerous philosophy, only to sacrifice everything to protect the civilization he'd claimed was fundamentally flawed. I received something yesterday, Wayne said finally, pulling out an isolinear chip. Transmitted through a Ferengi data broker. Encrypted with algorithms that took my personal systems 6 hours to crack. He placed it on the table. It's from Luthor. Recorded before the dimensional rift collapse. Picard and Sisko exchanged glances. You're certain it's authentic? Picard asked. Verified through multiple protocols, Wayne confirmed. He set it up to transmit automatically if he failed to input a cancellation code within a specific time frame. A dead man's switch, essentially. He activated the chip, and a holographic image of Lex Luthor appeared above the table, small enough to maintain privacy in the cafe's corner booth. The holographic Luthor looked tired but composed, sitting in what appeared to be his quarters on Nelvana 3. When he spoke, his voice carried the same intensity as when he'd been alive, but tempered with something that might have been acceptance. If you're watching this, it means I didn't survive the dimensional rift collapse. Which means the plan worked, the founder is dead, and the Dominion won't be accessing alternate realities anytime soon. I hope you'll forgive the melodrama of a posthumous message, but I spent my entire previous life being several steps ahead of everyone else. Old habits die hard. The holographic Luthor smiled slightly, almost self-deprecating. I want to address something that I'm sure you're all debating right now, what my final act means for the philosophical argument we've been having. Did I prove that exceptionalism is necessary by acting unilaterally to save billions? Or did I prove the Federation was right by sacrificing myself for a collective good I personally disagreed with? The answer, frustratingly for both sides, is yes to both. He leaned forward, his green eyes intense even in holographic form. I was right that exceptional individuals can see threats that systems miss. I identified Luthor as a founder when your entire intelligence apparatus failed to detect him. I developed technology in weeks that would have taken your research institutions years. I made decisions that needed to be made while committees would still be debating protocols. In all of that, my philosophy held true. Exceptionalism, when properly directed, accomplishes what collective mediocrity cannot. Luthor paused, his expression shifting to something more complicated. But Captain Picard was also right that true exceptionalism isn't about ruling, it's about service. And Commander Sisko was right that principles are worth dying for, even when, especially when, they're not your own principles. I spent my entire first life fighting beings who used their power to impose their will on humanity. And in the end, I became the exceptional individual choosing to protect humanity's right to choose its own path, even when I believed that path was wrong. The holographic figure stood, moving to a window that showed the Romulan stars. Here's what I learned in this universe, gentlemen. The Federation isn't wrong about equality creating strength. Your civilization has achieved remarkable things by valuing cooperation over competition, by building systems that distribute opportunity rather than concentrating power. But you're also not entirely right. Those systems only work because exceptional individuals, people like you, operate within them, making hard choices, bearing impossible burdens, and sacrificing pieces of themselves to maintain the illusion that the system runs itself. Luthor turned back to face the recording device. You need exceptional individuals. You always have. The difference between your philosophy and mine is that you've convinced your exceptional people to serve rather than rule, to sacrifice rather than command. That's not the suppression of exceptionalism I accused you of, it's the redirection of exceptionalism toward collective good. It's probably better than my way, though it pains me to admit it. He smiled, genuine and without irony. So here's my final gift to the Federation, proof that your system works not despite exceptional individuals, but because of them. Because people like Picard choose diplomacy over expedience. Because people like Sisko make impossible choices and live with the weight. Because people like Commander Data strive to understand humanity rather than transcend it. Your exceptionalism isn't about being better, it's about being better for others. The hologram flickered slightly, energy reserves running low. I've left technical specifications for several technologies in encrypted files that will be transmitted to Federation Science Council databases over the next year. Improvements to shield harmonics, warp field efficiency, medical scanners. Nothing weapons related, nothing that could be used to oppress. Just tools to help your civilization continue its experiment in collective greatness. Consider it my apology for the chaos I caused and my acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, you are onto something with this whole equality thing. Luthor's expression softened. To Bruce Wayne, if you're watching, you were right about me. About the trap I was walking into, about the choice I'd eventually face. You tried to warn me in your timeline, and I didn't listen. I'm listening now. Thank you for caring enough to try again in this universe. To Commander Sisko, you are the exceptional individual the Federation needs, someone who understands that principles are guides, not shackles. Who can make hard choices without losing sight of why those choices matter. Don't let what happened with Vreenak define you. Let it inform you. There's a difference. To Captain Picard, you asked me what drives humanity now that we've eliminated scarcity and competition. I think I finally understand. You're driven by the desire to prove that intelligence and compassion aren't contradictory. That strength and kindness can coexist. That humanity can be exceptional not by dominating others, but by inspiring them. It's a beautiful dream. Make it real. The hologram began to fade, energy finally depleting. In my universe, I fought gods because I refused to let humanity live at anyone's mercy. In your universe, I discovered that humanity doesn't need saving from gods, it needs saving from the parts of itself that still think like gods. Keep fighting that fight, gentlemen. Keep proving that collective wisdom can match individual brilliance, that cooperation can achieve what competition cannot, that the many can be stronger than the one. Luthor smiled one final time. And if you ever find yourself wondering whether one exceptional individual can truly make a difference against impossible odds, well, you're watching this message, which means the Dominion doesn't have dimensional rift technology and billions of lives were saved by someone who disagreed with everything you stand for but died protecting it anyway. So yes. Exceptional individuals matter. You just have to make sure they're exceptional in the right ways. Live long and prosper, gentlemen. And remember, the universe doesn't care about our philosophies. It only cares about what we do. Make it count. The hologram vanished, leaving three men sitting in silence in a cafe on Earth, each processing the final words of a man who'd challenged everything they believed and, in dying, somehow validated it all. He was insufferable, Sisko said finally. Brilliant, Picard added. And completely right about being completely wrong, Wayne finished. They sat in comfortable silence, three men who'd faced impossible choices and made them, who'd defended principles while compromising them, who'd proven that exceptionalism and equality weren't opposites but partners in the endless work of civilization. The Ferengi broker mentioned something else, Wayne said, pulling out another data chip. Luthor set up automated systems throughout the quadrant. Technology transfers, educational programs, research grants, all triggered by specific conditions and designed to help independent colonies, developing worlds, and frontier settlements. Nothing that violates the Prime Directive, nothing that creates dependency, just opportunities for people to be exceptional in their own ways. He's still trying to prove his point from beyond the grave, Sisko observed. Or he's admitting that the best way to encourage exceptionalism isn't to rule but to enable, Picard countered. That true leadership isn't about making decisions for others, it's about creating conditions where others can make their own decisions. Wayne nodded slowly. In my timeline, I spent decades trying to find a middle ground between Luthor's philosophy and my own. Trying to figure out how exceptional individuals could serve society without controlling it. I never found a satisfactory answer. He looked at both Starfleet officers. But watching you two navigate that same question, seeing how the Federation balances individual brilliance with collective good, maybe Luthor found the answer I was looking for. Not by winning the argument, but by losing it in the most exceptional way possible. Picard raised his teacup slightly. To Lex Luthor, who challenged everything we believed and, in doing so, helped us understand why we believe it. Sisko and Wayne raised their own cups, an informal toast to a man who'd been enemy, philosopher, and finally, reluctant hero. Do you think he'll be remembered? Sisko asked. Or will this be another classified file that disappears into Starfleet's archives? He'll be remembered by us, Picard said firmly. By the people who understood what he sacrificed and why. That's not monuments or history books, but it's something. It's what he would have wanted, I think, to be understood by people who could genuinely appreciate the complexity of what he did. And his technology? Wayne asked. The improvements he left behind? Will be studied, verified, and implemented where appropriate, Picard said. Credited to research teams and scientific institutions, as is proper. The Federation doesn't build cults of personality around individual contributors. He paused. But those of us who know will remember that those breakthroughs came from someone who believed our system was wrong, yet contributed to it anyway. That's a lesson worth preserving, even if the name attached to it isn't. Wayne stood, preparing to leave. I should get back to Earth. I have consultations with the Daystrom Institute about temporal mechanics. He paused, looking at both officers. Thank you. For proving that it's possible to be exceptional without being tyrannical. For showing that leadership and service aren't contradictory. Luthor saw it in the end. I hope I can live up to that example. After Wayne departed, Sisko and Picard remained at the table, watching ships come and go from the orbital platforms visible through the cafe's windows. Do you think we'll face another Luthor? Sisko asked. Another brilliant individual who challenges our foundations? Undoubtedly, Picard said. The Federation's principles will always be tested by people who see their flaws more clearly than their strengths. But that's healthy. That's how we improve. We listen to the criticism, we examine ourselves honestly, and we adapt while maintaining our core values. He smiled slightly. Luthor's greatest gift wasn't his technology or his intelligence. It was forcing us to articulate why we believe what we believe. To defend our philosophy not just to him, but to ourselves. And did we succeed? Picard considered carefully. We proved that our system can accommodate exceptional individuals without being dominated by them. That collective wisdom can recognize individual brilliance and direct it toward common good. That's not perfection, but it's progress. He stood, tugging down his uniform in that characteristic gesture. And progress, Commander, is all any civilization can hope for. We're better today than we were yesterday. We'll be better tomorrow than we are today. That's the promise of the Federation, not that we're perfect, but that we're always striving to be better. They left the cafe together, two Starfleet officers who'd faced a challenge to everything they believed and emerged with their convictions strengthened, not by defeating their opponent, but by understanding him. Across the quadrant, in the spaces between governments and the gaps in official records, Lex Luthor's automated systems activated on schedule. A research grant here, an educational opportunity there, a technological improvement slipping into open-source databases where anyone could access it. No names attached, no credit claimed, just quiet contributions to the endless work of helping others achieve their own exceptionalism. The Federation would continue its experiment in equality. The Romulans would rebuild their intelligence networks. The Dominion would adapt and plan. And somewhere in the vast complexity of it all, the ghost of a man who'd believed in exceptionalism would watch his final legacy unfold, not rule, not domination, not the imposition of his will, but the patient enabling of others to be exceptional in their own ways. It wasn't the victory he'd imagined when he first arrived in this universe. But perhaps it was the victory he'd needed, the proof that exceptionalism's highest calling was service, that brilliance's greatest achievement was sacrifice, and that the most exceptional act of all was dying to protect people's right to choose their own path. Even when you believed that path was wrong. Especially then. In the aftermath of Lex Luthor's sacrifice, the Federation emerged changed in ways both subtle and profound. His challenge to their philosophy, that equality suppressed exceptionalism, that collective wisdom was inferior to individual genius, had been answered not through debate but through demonstration. The Federation's exceptional individuals, Picard, Cisco, Data, and countless others, continued to serve rather than rule, to sacrifice rather than command, proving that exceptionalism and equality were not opposites but complements. Luthor's legacy lived on in encrypted databases and automated systems, quietly contributing to the civilization he died protecting. His technology improved shield efficiency across the fleet, enhanced medical scanners saved lives on frontier colonies, and his educational grants enabled thousands to pursue their own exceptional potential. No monuments bore his name, no history books recorded his sacrifice, but his impact rippled through the Federation like subspace waves, invisible, persistent, undeniable. The Romulan Star Empire, shaken by the revelation of Dominion infiltration, became more cautious in their strategic planning. The balance of power shifted subtly in the Federation's favor, though the Romulans would never admit why. And in the depths of Dominion space, the Founders marked the loss of dimensional rift technology as a significant setback, proof that even their most sophisticated infiltration couldn't overcome the Federation's capacity for exceptional individuals operating within collective frameworks. Perhaps most importantly, Luthor's final message forced the Federation to examine itself honestly. Was their system truly about equality, or had they simply learned to direct exceptionalism toward service? Did they celebrate collective wisdom, or did they rely on exceptional individuals while pretending the system ran itself? The questions remained, as they should, because a civilization that stops questioning itself stops growing. In the end, Lex Luthor, genius, philosopher, and reluctant martyr, proved something neither side of the philosophical debate expected, that the choice between exceptionalism and equality was a false binary. The real question wasn't whether exceptional individuals should exist, but what they should do with their gifts. Rule or serve. Command or enable. Impose or inspire. Luthor had chosen. And in choosing sacrifice over dominance, service over rule, he demonstrated that true exceptionalism wasn't about being better than others, it was about making others better through your example. The Federation he challenged, criticized, and finally protected would continue its experiment in collective greatness, knowing that exceptional individuals like Lex Luthor weren't threats to be contained, but contributions to be honored, even when they came wrapped in challenging philosophy and uncomfortable truths. The stars turned. Civilizations rose and fell. And somewhere in the vast complexity of the universe, the ghost of a man who'd fought gods learned that humanity's greatest strength wasn't the absence of exceptional individuals, but their willingness to be exceptional for others rather than over them. That lesson, more than any technology or philosophy, was Lex Luthor's true legacy to the Star Trek universe.